They said I'd never have to go back. They told me I was safe, that it could never hurt me again. Well, they were wrong. Because today I'll be reading scary stories from California. Look, people give California a lot of crap, but you know what? They're part of America, darn it. They're just as much our brothers and sisters as Nebraska. You're welcome, Nebraska. So enjoy these allegedly true scary stories, and be sure to send me your scary stories at darkstories.org so I can narrate them. At the moment, I'm looking for new trucker stories. Also, don't forget to follow and rate our newest shows: Destination Terror, about haunted places, and Tales from the Break Room, which is about scary work stories. You can find them on Spotify, Apple, and your favorite podcast app. Now, let's begin. Unknown Creature, from Anonymous. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I lived in the Newport Beach area in California, in a nice little neighborhood with my parents. My room was on the second floor and faced out into the street and towards the other houses. It had a slight view down the street. I sadly don't recall why my shades and curtains weren't closed that night, or what woke me up from a dead sleep, but I do know that I shot up wide awake in the middle of the night. I crawled across my bed to lower my shades and to pull my curtain closed when a dark shape caught my attention. I looked down at this dark mass moving up the street. Now, maybe it was because I was young and the logic of hiding behind anything made me feel safer, but I ended up hiding just behind my curtain. I was on the second floor though, and I probably couldn't be seen from where it was on the street. As it drew closer and closer, I noticed it looked weird, kind of like a brown hyena, due to what appeared to be the telltale long-haired coat and pointed ears. But that couldn't be possible. They aren't indigenous to California, so how did one wind up here? However, once it was across the street from my house, its legs seemed longer than normal, and its neck seemed a little too long. In fact, all of its proportions all seemed wrong. Eerily, it made no sound as it walked, too. Every once in a while, though, it would stop to sniff something here and there. Suddenly, it turned into the brush in front of my neighbor's house, and with no noise, it entered into them silently. I must have strained my eyes for another 10 or 15 minutes after it entered the bushes, trying to see if it would hop up on a wall or reappear. But the thing is, I never saw it come back out. All I can think of is maybe it escaped somehow from the San Diego Zoo, but that's a 45-minute to an hour drive south of the old house, and there were no mentions on news reports of an escaped animal. At the same time, I don't think such an animal could make it that far up the coast without being seen by someone. If you have any idea what this was, it would be very helpful. If not, I guess it's just one of the many mysteries of this world. My Traumatizing Encounters with a Murderer, from Cody. Back then, I was 8 years old and living in California. I'm here to tell you that some people are freaks. This happened in my hometown, which I won't name here for privacy reasons, but I will say it's a small rural town in California near the Oregon border. One day I was walking back home from my school, which was about a 10-minute walk from where I lived. As I said, I was 8 years old, and I never thought anything bad would happen in a small town like that. Everyone knew everyone, or so we thought. As I walked, a white van with no windows or license plate. I was a very attentive kid. The man inside the van said he was new to town and asked me where he could find the local Walmart. For reference, the local Walmart was about 50 minutes away. So I told him the nearest one was in another town about an hour away, and I told him the name of the town. At that, the man seemed angry. He then got out of his truck and asked me if I was giving him sass, because he was sure this was the right town. I was always a pretty shy kid, so this was a huge red flag for me. I ran home crying, and my mother asked me what happened. I told her and she called the police, But of course, they could do nothing, nor did they really care about some strange man yelling at me. Unfortunately, this would not be the last time I saw him. The next encounter is when I was walking with my friends to go get some ice cream from our local candy shop. We were walking together when that same white van pulled up, but this time it did have license plates, so at first I didn't think it would be the same man driving it. Until, that is, he stepped out, asking us if we wanted some candy. My friend, David, who had always been a smart aleck, said, "There's a candy shop right up the road, so we're good." At this, the man, like before, got angry, and he began to yell at us, but this time, he demanded that we get into his van. When we didn't comply with this order, he chased us and we ran away. I never understood why, but he never got back into his van to chase us with it. He always ran after us on foot. The three of us split up and ran into the woods. The road we were on, there was woods on either side of us. He singled me out because he must have recognized me from before. I decided I'm done with this and began running towards my home. From there, it would be a 2-minute run. He kept on chasing me all the way up to my house, and when I got to my house, my mom and dad were home, thankfully. I ran in hysterical, and my mother asked what happened. I told her it was the same man, and I explained what happened this time. My father ran outside and confronted the man. My father is 6'5" with a bulky build, and he was muscular back then, not someone you wanted to mess with. Not to mention he had a military background. The man immediately tried to run away upon seeing my dad, but my dad easily caught up with him, threw him down on the ground, and held him until the police came. They arrested the man, and, as it turns out, the guy was wanted for murder, kidnapping, and other things of a little girl. He was convicted, and I never saw him again. I'm so glad that he didn't catch me or any of my friends, or we could have been his next victim. I still get anxiety attacks from strangers approaching too fast or someone moving too suddenly towards me. Just from the thought of what could have happened, I never learned his name, and I will never care to. To be honest, I just want to put this behind me. Paper Bag Creep. From Anonymous. It was a dark and stormy night, which made the morning dreary and thick with California coastal fog. But it was the last day of summer my sophomore year back in 1987, and like heck was I going to waste it sitting at home listening to the 1000th repeat of my little sister's favorite song, Caribbean Queen. So I called up my best friend, who we called Bunny back then, which is a John Cusack movie in-joke. His car was broken down again, so we planned to time our ride on the city bus, so he could catch the same bus 8 miles from my house. I usually sat in the middle row near the back entrance and loved to rest my knees up on the seat in front of me. Then I would just stare through the cloudy, scratched plastic windows. Plus, the reflection in the smoky tinted plastic reflected the interior, and I could covertly watch the other passengers while pretending to enjoy the outside view during the 15 to 20 minute ride. When I boarded and sat down, I noticed a guy in a monk's brown robe sitting in the back row. His Coke bottle glasses obstructed my judgment as to which direction he was staring, but if I had to guess, it did seem like he was looking at me. Only natural, right? As I was currently the closest person to him on the bus. Just people watching, I assumed, as I would do that too. I'd seen the dude before as well, walking along the curvy mountain roads, panhandling downtown, and sometimes at the beach. I guess you could call him a local weirdo. Another of California's fruits and nuts. A few miles in, he got up and sat across from me, nearer the door, so I figured he was getting off soon. He'd angled himself to look straight at me though, and I hated being social. So to avoid conversation, I kept my nose to the window, glancing back to keep an eye on him as he repeatedly clutched and crumpled the rolled edge of a noisy paper shopping bag. Finally, Bunny boarded the bus and noisily sat next to me. He then happily let me know that his poop that day looked like deer poop. That's how Bunny was sometimes. No filter. But this did crack me up, and I momentarily forgot about the monk dude. Everyone left the bus at the main station, and Bunny and I spent a few hours perusing the local outdoor mall and all the tourist junk stores. Then we headed back to the station, intending to take the next bus into a neighboring town for some food. Waiting for the bus to arrive, Bunny asked me not too quietly, "Hey, do you know that dude? He's been following us this whole time." On the other side of the big triangle-shaped planter, the monk was apparently unpacking his paper bag. I watched him carefully refold some clothing, towels, and some other things, arranging them on the concrete bench. I laughed and said, "The creeper likes you, pretty boy." But Bunny looked worried. He keeps unpacking and packing that bag every time we stop to look at the stuff. It's weird. I think I saw a knife in there too, he explained. I then noticed that a bus that would take us halfway to the next place was here already. "Let's just take 69 right now," I said. "All right, let's go," he agreed. We ran across the station and boarded the bus. The bus sat there waiting for other passengers, and we nervously watched the monk slowly pack up his things again, and he came onto our bus. We sat in our usual middle seat and the monk sat behind us, so we couldn't really watch him this time as we rode to the next station at another mall in silence. When we got there, we left the bus and slowly walked into the main entrance to the mall. The monk was a bit behind us, so as soon as we got through the doors, we ran around in a loop to the other entrance, boarding our connecting bus into the next town, laughing and bragging about how we had ditched that dude at last. It wasn't long until those smiles fell right off our faces, because that monk creeper boarded our bus and glared at us as the bus started up. He sat near the rear entrance. We were trapped. The bus hit a halfway point at the local college, and with a press of about 40 college students, we got off the bus and went to a payphone in a little store by the bus stop. The monk was standing just outside the glass packing the bag again, but pressing the big kitchen knife into the folded stuff until the edges raised up from the pressure on the items. He was staring at us, but we were sure he couldn't hear us from there. Bunny called our friends one by one, and even our parents, but either they all didn't take it seriously or they were busy. We only had 1 quarter left, so we called a kind of gangster friend of ours named Shamu, who had a car. We pleaded with him and promised him all kinds of stuff like Bunny's new bike and homemade cookies until he agreed with our plan. So we hung up and waited for the next bus. The monk was getting twitchy and began mumbling to himself as he packed his bag over and over. We got on the bus and took the 40-minute bus ride in silence up near the driver. The monk sat in the back, and every time his seat opened up he would move up to that seat, getting closer, all the while mumbling louder until he was shaking his head, gnashing his teeth, and almost yelling curses and prayer-like rants about Satan and how we were evil, and he was the devil and would take us to hell. Eventually, all the other passengers were staring at him, creeped out and confused too. At one point, when he moved seats, one lady that was sitting close to him pulled out a rosary and ran to a different seat, handling the beads. I'd had it with this bullcrap, telling the driver that this jerk had been following us all day, that he had a knife. I said we should call the police to come get him at the station. I'm not sure she believed me, but she did keep glancing back as he got louder and kept her eyes on him. He was only 3 seats away then, when we rolled into the station, so we booked it through the drizzly weather, across the station to the public parking area, looking for and screaming for Shamu. We cut across the busy street, with me almost getting hit by a delivery truck that clipped my backpack, sending me spinning to the ground. Bunny quickly grabbed my elbow and pulled me up. We went to the parking lot where Shamu had gotten out of his red VW Rabbit and was waving to us. We screamed at him to get in and to go, go, go as we crammed ourselves into the car. At this point, the monk was now stomping after us, screaming rants at us. At last, some security guards surrounded him, and Shamu peeled out of the parking lot and drove away. Shamu's face turned pale as he admitted, "I thought you guys were joking with me." "Yeah, no," I said. Bunny screamed out the window, "Screw you, you creep." as we passed the now struggling, creepy monk wannabe. I'd like to say I never saw him again, but he was still around. I would stay very far away from him whenever I could. 20-odd years later, I've moved 2 states away. As time passed, Bunny died of a heart attack, and Shamu did a stint in prison. I recently saw a video of my hometown area, and he was there in the background. He was older and far away, but it still gave me deep chills down in my gut. That dude is still out there, free to fixate on someone else. Maybe you, maybe your kids. Creepy lights in the sky. From Anonymous. I'm a 16-year-old boy who lives in Chula Vista, California. It's a beautiful, decent-sized city located right near the Mexican border. The west side is by the bay, which has that salty aquatic water, while the east side, near where I live, smells like plants. It helps that it's closer to the mountains. Me and a few close friends were having a get-together at a boy's house. The boy's name was Jaden. It was getting dark, and it was winter, so it got dark even earlier. The sky was a light baby blue and was kind of orange, and the moon was a small crescent, which barely had any light shining down on us. We headed to the local park to go on a small adventure, which was less than a half a mile away. We had to cross a small canyon to get there. The canyon was not very wide, but was approximately the size of a football field. There were always coyotes and possums prowling about there, or mentally unstable men doing some very strong substances. After walking there with some friends for a bit, we returned to the top, which was near a street where cars would always speed by on. 3 of our friends were down in the cul-de-sac in our neighborhood, down a trail from the canyon. Me and my friends were walking up to the top. We then saw a white light fill up the sky towards the south. This was not a car. First of all, we didn't hear anyone pass by for about 5 minutes, and secondly, that type of light wouldn't be able to fill up the sky like that. So we thought it was a spotlight, but there were no structures in that direction that would project them, except mountains that would stretch for miles, and it was about 10 times brighter than a normal spotlight. Cece's phone was dead and kept turning on and off. That was creepy since it was a newer model iPhone. Then we saw a red light fill up the sky. It moved as a streak and vanished directly overhead. I started to get even more freaked out. What would be a logical explanation for this? There were no cars passing by, no spotlights or anything that bright. Plus, how would a red light light up the sky right after that as a streak? The red light was even brighter than the previous white one, not to mention the weirdness from Cece's mobile phone. A minute later, we met up with some friends who were down in the cul-de-sac waiting for Jaden to return as he took care of some things at his house. They had seen the white flash of light, and also mentioned that they hadn't seen any cars. White and red can be construed as the colors of the head and taillights of automobiles, but as I said, no cars had passed by before, during, and after the encounter. My friend Wendell revealed he saw the red flash of light too. He said it was in the shape of a sphere. We went on with our night, trying to pretend nothing happened. Still, I do consider if what we saw was the work of extraterrestrial life forms. It makes me wonder if we're not the only intelligent things in the universe. Perhaps we'll never know what truly transpired that night. The Dust Man. From Anonymous. I'm surprised I can still recall this memory. I was about a 6 or 7-year-old girl at the time. I was in my old apartment in Temecula, California. My apartment was a really small 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment. My siblings and I would sleep in the master bedroom. We all slept in bunk beds on each side of the room. My sister and I slept on the right side of the bedroom on a gray bunk bed, and my 2 brothers slept on the left side of the room on the white bunk bed. The older siblings always slept on the top bunk, and I was one of them. Each of the beds had a window by them too. Now, I had just awakened from a nightmare about a zombie apocalypse in my apartment complex, which had for some reason occurred because we ran out of candy. A stupid dream, yeah, but whatever. It was about 2 a.m. I was facing the wall when I woke up. For the first time, I didn't feel tired right after waking up in the middle of the night. I rubbed my eyes and turned my body until I was facing the room. A blast of air had blew in my face when I turned around. I closed my eyes for a bit, but I couldn't fall asleep. I opened my eyes and looked around the room. I then looked at the window. Then my hairs stood up on my head. There was a figure staring out of my window, right by my bed. I could barely see it, but it was there. A tall human figure made of dust. It couldn't have been nothing. It was a distinct figure, a tall man who looked like he was at least 19 years old. He was wearing a long brown button-up shirt with a darker brown colored pocket. He had short, shaggy black hair, and he had baggy jeans with tears in them. I'm not sure how I remember all these details even now. After about 5 minutes, the figure began to move. The figure looked at me, then looked back at the window. He did that for a couple more minutes. I couldn't move. I was frozen in shock. I wanted to scream for my siblings, but I just couldn't get myself to do it. After a couple of minutes had passed, he just stared at me. He stared at me for so long. I was about to get up to run to my parents' room, but before I could get up, the figure floated up to my bed. He pushed me down and said in a very deep and groggy voice, "Bye, Mommy." Then he vanished. This is way creepier because I have a son, and he had just recently got into a car accident when his older friends were drunk driving. He'd been wearing the same clothes as that figure, and before he had left to go to his friend's house, he looked at me strangely, and he'd said, "Bye, Mommy," in the same sort of tone. I was shocked. It was like my own kid knew about the time I was 6 or 7, or perhaps the figure itself was a premonition. Another thing is, when my son was little, he used to stare out the window and look at me and look back. Plus, his first 2 words were Mommy and bye. So when he would look out the window, he would jump on me and say, "Bye, Mommy." Maybe it's a coincidence, but I don't think so. Silhouette in the Forest, from Doge69. I live in Northern California. A few months back, my brother and I decided to stay in our parents' RV. It was behind our small house at the edge of the woods. It was around 11 that night when things got creepy. I began to hear light footsteps around the RV and strange breathing. At first, I thought it was my mom or dad checking in on us, but after 10 minutes of the footsteps and breathing, I finally couldn't take it. I went to the back bedroom of the RV to tell my brother, but by the time I got there, I found my brother pale, scared, and lying on the floor, hiding. I tried to talk to him, but he shushed me. I then looked out the window, but I didn't see anything weird. The whole time, though, the forest was silent. I noticed then that the footsteps had stopped too. Not long after that, the normal sounds of the woods came back. I didn't think much of it at the time, and I went back to bed. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, I shot up from my bed. I figured I'd had one of those dreams that make you wake suddenly. But then I realized the silence of the woods had returned. It was so silent all I could hear was the small creek a few yards from the RV. I looked around, trying to regain my senses. That's when I heard more footsteps. I thought about my brother, and the 2 of us trying to make a run for it back home. But I didn't know what would happen to us if we went outside. My brother had awakened too, and heard the sounds. When I went to the back bedroom to where he was, I saw something peek in through the window. You'd have to be the size of a man to do that. Whatever it was shadowy and dark. Terrified, I watched it run off into the forest. The 2 of us then stayed awake all night, and only when the sun was up did we book it back to the house. So much for a quiet shift. From Somedrummerboy. I'm a Marine, and at the time of this story I was at 29 Palms, California for MOS school. If you don't know what it's like, it's a beach without an ocean. This happened about a week or so before my class was to graduate and be sent out to our new duty station. My roommates and I were among the 12 or so who were scheduled to be on fire watch at 2200 or 10 p.m. to 0200 2 a.m. To give a brief layout of the terrain, picture 4 3-story dorm-looking buildings, with 2 on a small hill and the other 2 at the bottom. Going to the left takes you to some class buildings, and to the right a small sandy portion of desert that leads to the medical side. To the rear is another set of barracks, and a tiny set of jagged sandy hills with a poorly lit road. Me and my battle buddy decided to patrol the bottom right barracks building because there was a table and bench that we could use to take a break at. There was a small fight that almost broke out that we had to stop. We left it in the hands of that particular class once everything was settled, and afterwards we thought that would be the highlight of our shift. We then began to patrol each floor, making sure everyone was secured in their room and that no one was out. As we were making our way through the second floor, we noticed that someone's door was open and made our way up to that room. I was about to inform the Marines inside about leaving their door open when I noticed what one of them had on their rack. It was a Ouija board. It was out and in the middle of being used. I instantly thought about how tonight was going to get weird, because I'm not crazy enough to mess with those things. I had to say something because we made eye contact with them. "Evening, gents. Just wanted to let y'all know about not leaving the door open," I said. "Sorry, guys, our door doesn't close all the way, but we'll use a chair to block it before we crash," he replied. "Tight. Y'all be careful with that thing," I warned as I closed the door. I looked at my battle buddy and he said, "Well, tonight can't get any worse, I suppose." As soon as he said that, the light above us began to flicker, and I let out an annoyed sigh. It probably will. About 2 hours into our shift, we were back near the room with the Ouija board, talking about where we were from and the cryptids of our respective regions, when suddenly we both noticed something. There was another set of boots walking behind us, but there was no one outside the building, let alone the second floor. My battle buddy turns to me and asks, "Are you hearing what I'm hearing?" "Yeah, let's finish this lap and we'll swap out with the guys on the hill," I said. The footsteps stayed behind us until we left the vicinity of the building and switched out with our roommates. As we began walking around the quarantine area of the barracks, we greeted the female duty Marine when we passed by and began to make our way up the stairs. With about 15 minutes left of the shift, we were deep into talking about skinwalkers and wendigos while on the 3rd floor. We were about halfway across the walkway when suddenly we both heard what sounded like a woman screaming while being gutted. "What in the world was that?" my battle buddy exclaimed. "No idea, but it sounds bad. Let's move," I said as we began to book it towards the end of the building. We looked out over the railing, and there was no sign of anything bad. No blood or indicators of a struggle. Nothing that would require immediate attention. I told my battle buddy to provide me with security while I tried to take a closer look. I then noticed there was a minor disturbance in the sand. It looked as if someone had jumped then moved towards the hills. I gave this information to my battle buddy. Then he mentioned that the female Marine was downstairs where the scream had come from. We both began to sprint down the stairs to where she was at, only to find that she was still at her post, unharmed. "You guys all right?" she asked. "Well, did you happen to hear anything weird a moment ago?" I asked. She shook her head, then said that our shift was about to end, and we should make our way to formation. I motioned to my battle buddy to follow me to the assembly area, and once we were dismissed, we decided to briefly go back and inspect the tracks, but they were gone. We looked at each other, confused. "Let's head to bed," I said. "Not our problem anymore." And in case you're wondering if we were armed at the time, we were at student status, so we didn't have access to the armory, and only the road guards carried radios. It's all fun and games until you have Firewatch. That brings us to the end of this episode of Darkness Prevails. More terrifying stories are on the way soon, so subscribe and smash that like button. By the way, did you know this show is available as a podcast called Unexplained Encounters? Just search for, follow, and rate Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. This show is part of the EerieCast network. Go to EerieCast.com for more scary podcasts, such as Freaky Folklore, which explores your favorite monsters, myths, and mysteries, as well as Redwood Bureau, a fictional horror podcast about an agent on the run from an evil secret organization that captures supernatural creatures and entities. Well, thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.